My son looked me straight in the eyes and said, "Dad, you are too old to travel. Please stay home and watch the house while we enjoy our trip." His wife nodded in agreement, as if my life now had no purpose other than guarding their belongings. I didn't argue. I simply smiled, wished them well, and the next morning, I bought a first-class ticket on the same flight. When he turned around on the plane and saw me sitting there, relaxed and sipping orange juice, his jaw dropped. That was the moment he finally realized, age does not decide your worth, your spirit does. Before I continue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach more people. My name is Walter Briggs, and I am 71 years old. I spent most of my life working as a college professor, teaching young minds how to dream big and never limit themselves. After my wife Linda passed away, people assumed I would sit at home and wait for time to pass, but my heart still beat with purpose. Traveling was something Linda and I always loved. Before she died, we made a list of places we wanted to see together: Greece, Italy, Japan, Alaska. She made me promise that I would still go, even if she was not here to hold my hand. My son Dylan moved in with his wife Hannah and their daughter Lily when their house went under renovation. Lily was a light in my life. She would sit beside me on the porch, asking about the countries I had visited. She would say, "Grandpa, I want to see the world with you someday." But not everyone shared that excitement. Hannah believed that older people should stay quiet, stay put, and stay out of the way. She often made comments like, "Dad should be resting. These flights are too exhausting for him," or, "We can't risk anything happening to him while we're trying to enjoy our trip." Dylan didn't correct her. He started believing that protecting meant limiting me. When I told them I wanted to visit Greece to honor my wife, they laughed it off. Hannah said, "Traveling is reckless. What if you get sick in another country? We don't have time to babysit." Babysit, that's the word she used. Babysit. As if I were a child, not the man who paid for their wedding, helped them through their financial troubles, and guided Dylan through every step of his life. It wasn't just hurtful, it was dehumanizing. Still, I stayed calm. I asked Dylan directly, "Do you truly believe I am not capable of traveling?" He didn't answer the question. Instead, he said, "Dad, just trust me on this. You're safer at home. We will take you somewhere later." Then he handed me a list of house rules for while they were gone: how often to water the plants, when to turn on the alarm system, and directions on how to handle deliveries. He even said, "Try not to move around too much while we are gone." As I stood there holding that paper, I saw clearly what had happened. In their eyes, I was no longer a living man with dreams. I was a housekeeper, a watchman, a burden wrapped in gray hair. But my granddaughter Lily still saw me differently. She hugged me that night and said, "Grandpa, I wish you were coming with us. You know more about the world than anyone." Her words didn't just touch me. They reminded me that wisdom and adventure do not expire with age. They grow stronger. So I made a decision, not to argue, not to beg, but to act. I remembered something my wife once told me: when people stop seeing your worth, you must show them, not with anger, but with action. The next morning, I got dressed, walked out the front door quietly, and headed to the travel agency run by my old friend, Mr. Patel. By the time the sun set that evening, I held a first-class ticket for the exact same flight my son and his family would be taking. Except this time, I wouldn't be sitting at home guarding walls. I would be sitting in the sky, honoring my promise, and reminding my son that a father does not stop being a human being when he turns 70. He might have thought he was leaving me behind, but when he stepped onto that plane, he was about to learn that you cannot set limits on a man who still chooses to live. The day before their flight, the house was buzzing with excitement, but I was treated as if I were invisible in my own home. Hannah was pacing around the living room, double-checking travel documents and bragging on the phone to her friend about the luxury trip. She said things like, first-class cabins, private tours, the best hotels, all thanks to Nathan's connections, as if I had not booked and paid for dozens of such trips for my own family in the years before she was even part of it. Dylan walked in with his suitcases and said, "Dad, remember to set the alarm every night and don't open the door for anyone." His tone sounded less like a son talking to a father and more like a landlord giving instructions to a tenant. Hannah added, "Also, please don't go out too much. You know how you get tired." I looked at both of them and simply nodded. There was a time when my son asked me for guidance. Now, he was giving me permission to walk in my own house. When I mentioned again that I was considering traveling myself, Hannah rolled her eyes and said, "Dad, why are you being so stubborn? At your age, the safest place for you is here. Please don't make this trip about you." She said it with a smile, but it was the kind of smile that hides disrespect behind politeness. What she didn't know was that my ticket was already confirmed, my suitcase already packed, and my passport already in my coat pocket. I watched them load their luggage into the car the next morning. Lily, my granddaughter, hugged me tightly and whispered, "I wish you were coming with us, Grandpa." Her eyes were full of sadness, not for herself, but for me. I bent down and said, "Sometimes people forget what someone can do. The only way to remind them is to do it." She didn't fully understand, but she nodded as if she felt something important was about to happen. Dylan said, "We'll call you when we land. Just don't try anything stressful while we're gone." I smiled gently. "You have my word," I replied, without lying, because what I was about to do was not stressful. It was liberating. As soon as they drove away, I locked the house, grabbed my suitcase, and headed straight to the airport. My ticket was first class, seat 2A. Their seats were in business class, just a row behind. I arrived early, checked in, and sat comfortably in the lounge while they were likely still thinking I was at home watering the plants. Sitting in that airport lounge brought back memories of my late wife. She loved airports. The idea that you could leave behind your everyday worries and step into a new world filled her with joy. I smiled to myself, feeling her presence beside me. This was not just a trip. It was a promise being fulfilled. When boarding began, I walked calmly down the jet bridge and took my seat. The flight attendant offered me juice, and I thanked her, relaxing into my chair. A few minutes later, Dylan and Hannah boarded. They were laughing about something, completely unaware. They passed by my row without looking, as I was seated facing away from the aisle. But then, as they began placing their luggage in the overhead compartment behind me, Dylan turned his head, and his voice stopped mid-sentence. His eyes widened. He froze. Hannah looked up at him, confused, and then followed his gaze. Her mouth opened slightly as she stared at me, sitting comfortably, sipping orange juice, as if this were the most natural place in the world for me to be. For a full 5 seconds, not a single word came out of their mouths. The only sound was the boarding announcements echoing through the cabin. Hannah was the first to speak. What are you doing here?" she asked in disbelief. I calmly replied, "Traveling." She blinked and said, "In first class?" I smiled and answered, "Yes. I figured if I'm too old to travel, I might as well do it in comfort." The flight attendant approached and said, "Mr. Briggs, once you are ready, we will serve lunch." She addressed me with the kind of respect Hannah had forgotten I deserved. Dylan was stunned into silence. He tried to recover his composure, but his pride wouldn't let him speak. I could feel their embarrassment, not because I had done anything wrong, but because all their assumptions had collapsed in an instant. The flight took off, and I could sense Dylan and Hannah whispering behind me, trying to process the situation. The moment they tried to control became the moment they lost control. They had tried to keep me behind, to limit my world to 4 walls and a television screen. But now they were watching me choose life, choose movement, choose joy. And that was just the beginning of the lesson they were about to learn, not about travel, but about respect. As the plane ascended into the clouds, I reclined my seat and closed my eyes, not out of arrogance, but out of peace. I had not come on this journey to embarrass anyone. I had come to reclaim something that had slowly been taken from me, my right to live fully. The flight attendants treated me with kindness, asking if I needed anything. I could see passengers glancing my way, curious about the older man traveling alone in first class. Meanwhile, behind me, Dylan and Hannah were whispering, their voices low but tense. Every so often, I could feel Dylan's eyes on the back of my seat, as if he were trying to understand how the father he considered too old to travel was suddenly more capable and composed than he had imagined. Lunch was served, and I enjoyed it quietly. Halfway through the meal, Lily walked up to me. She had chosen to sit with her parents initially, but now she wanted to sit with me. The flight attendant made an exception, and Lily took the seat next to me, her face glowing with happiness. "Grandpa, I knew you would do something amazing," she whispered. I smiled and put my arm around her. That one moment, simple and full of love, held more meaning than any word of approval from adults who had forgotten what love really means. After the meal, turbulence began to rock the plane. The seatbelt light came on, and a bit of panic rippled through the cabin. A few passengers gasped, holding on to their armrests. I remained calm, speaking softly to Lily, assuring her everything would be fine. The turbulence grew stronger for a moment, and I could hear Hannah panicking behind me, her voice shaking. Dylan tried to calm her, but even his voice trembled with uncertainty. In that moment of fear, it wasn't youth or wealth or status that provided security. It was composure, wisdom, and experience. I turned slightly and spoke calmly to Hannah. "Breathe slowly. You're safe. Turbulence can't bring down a plane. It's just air currents." She looked at me, eyes wide, and followed my guidance. Slowly, the color returned to her face. For the first time since this journey began, there was no superiority in her expression. There was gratitude. Once the turbulence passed, a different kind of silence filled the cabin. It was not the silence of tension, but the silence that follows realization. Dylan stood up and approached my seat. His voice was quiet, almost hesitant. "Dad," he said, "can we talk later?" I nodded without looking away from the clouds outside the window. "Of course." He walked back, not defeated, but humbled. That was the turning point. Not the moment I boarded the plane, not the moment he saw me, but the moment he realized that age does not weaken purpose. It clarifies it. We landed in Greece, and I stepped off the plane first. The warm sunlight washed over me, and for a moment, I closed my eyes and felt Linda beside me. I had made it, just as I promised her. Dylan and Hannah walked behind me, carrying their own silence. I could tell they were not angry. They were reflecting. As we reached the terminal, Dylan finally spoke. "Dad," he said softly, "I misjudged you. I forgot who you are." His voice broke slightly. "I thought I was protecting you, but I see now I was limiting you." Hannah lowered her head and said quietly, "We were wrong." There was no pride in her voice, only remorse. I simply responded, "The world doesn't end when a person turns 70. It begins again, if you let it." We retrieved our luggage, and as we walked toward the exit, Lily reached for my hand and said, "Grandpa, can we see everything together?" I looked down at her, my heart full. "Yes," I answered. "That's exactly what we're going to do." Traveling was never about proving them wrong. It was about reminding them of the truth my wife had once told. Life doesn't stop because you grow older. It stops when you stop living. Standing on foreign soil with the sun shining in my face, I could feel that my life, our life, was just beginning again. The next morning, the four of us stepped out of the hotel and into the heart of Athens. The sun was rising over the ancient city, painting the stone pathways gold. The wind carried with it the faint scent of history, olive trees, and sea air. Just as my aunt described in her travel journals, I stood still, letting the warmth soak into my skin, peaceful, almost sacred, and I could feel my wife's spirit walking beside. Lily stood close to me, holding my excited and full of wonder. Dylan and Hannah followed behind, quiet, not rushing as they normally would. There was no schedule, no pressure, no demand, open and free, unfolding naturally. As we continued walking, we reached the foot of the Acropolis, where travelers gathered in groups. A tour guide began speaking to philosophers and scholars who had once stood in the same place, questioning the nature of dignity, wisdom, and life. I watched Dylan as he listened, his eyes not on the ruin, but on me. He was beginning to understand something deeper than a textbook could teach him. For the first time since we arrived, he stepped forward and walked beside me instead of in front. "Dad," he said quietly, "I used to think slowing down meant losing purpose. But right now, I see you walking slower than ever, and somehow you are more present than else here." His voice wavered, as if each word cut a layer of pride, but gained him back a piece of himself. I simply nodded and replied, "You don't truly see the world until you stop rushing through it." When we reached the top, overlooking the city, I took out a small folded paper from my pocket. It was a note my wife had written years ago. She and I had planned to read it at this very spot. My hands trembled, not because I was weak, but because I was finally fulfilling something she and I had dreamed of. To my future self, the note began. If you are reading this, it means you made it. Don't look at this city with your eyes. Look with your soul. Life is not measured in years, but in moments when your heart is awake. As I finished reading, my eyes filled with tears, not of grief, but of peace. I had carried a promise across time and loss, and today, I had kept it. That's when it happened. The moment that changed everything. Dylan stepped forward, placed his hand on my shoulder, and said, "Dad, I need to say something in front of all of us." His voice was no longer proud, no longer careless. It was raw and honest. He turned to Hannah, then to Lily, then back to me. I forgot what strength looks like. I thought age meant limitation, when really, you are stronger now than I've ever been. You lost Mom and didn't stop living. You retired and didn't stop dreaming. You walked through your pain and turned it into purpose. And while I was worried about protecting you, you were the one showing all of us how to truly live. His voice cracked and tears fell, not hidden or swallowed, but freely and openly, like a child rediscovering his father for the first time. Hannah stepped forward too. Her eyes were soft, not defensive. "Mr. Briggs, I judged you. I acted like age was a weakness, when in fact, I was the one afraid of life changing. I tried to control everything, including you. But now I see, you are not holding us back. You are the one showing us the way." For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind blew gently across the stones, as if even the ancient world around us was listening. Then Lily wrapped her arms around me and said, "Grandpa, you're the bravest person I know." In that moment, standing above the city, surrounded by 3 generations of my family, I realized something powerful. I had not come on this journey to prove my worth. I had come to remind them of their own, not with speeches, not with rules, but with example. One quiet act of courage that spoke louder than years of conversation. We spent the rest of the day exploring ruins, tasting local food, and sharing stories about Linda. Instead of walking ahead, Dylan walked beside me. Instead of rolling her eyes, Hannah asked questions and listened. Instead of being a burden, I was finally seen as the beating heart of the family. But the most important part was this. It didn't happen because I argued. It happened because I chose action over anger, dignity over drama, and purpose over permission. That was the moment my son didn't just see me. He rediscovered me, and in doing so, he rediscovered himself. As our trip continued, something remarkable began to unfold, not in the places we visited, but in the people we had become. The tension that once filled every room we shared had been replaced by something I had quietly prayed for over many years: understanding. There was no longer a rush to get ahead, no more subtle jabs about age or ability. Instead, there were conversations filled with curiosity, laughter that came naturally, and a softening in the eyes of those who had once looked at me as if my place in life had already ended. One morning, as we sat at a small cafe overlooking the blue waters of the Aegean Sea, Dylan turned to me and said, "Dad, I thought responsibility meant controlling everything. Now I realize true strength is knowing when to let people live." He admitted that somewhere along his own journey, he had begun to fear aging, not because of what it would do to his body, but because he believed it would take away his freedom. He saw me growing older and assumed it meant growing smaller. But now, through this journey, he saw that age did not shrink a person's world. Fear does, and courage brings it back. Hannah, who had once seen me as fragile and outdated, began to ask me questions, not just about travel, but about life. She said to me one evening while we walked through the Plaka district, "Mr. Briggs, when did you stop worrying about getting older?" I smiled, told her the truth. The day I realized getting old is not a burden, it is a privilege. It means I survived everything that tried to stop me. Her eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw no one guarding her pride, but a woman opening her heart. Even Lily changed. She no longer saw me as someone I'd lose one day, but someone she could live and learn with today. She held not out of fear, but out of pride, and every time she ran ahead or something new, she looked back, not to check on me, but to make was beside her, because now she knew it would be. By the end of the trip, Dylan insisted I not just be in, but that I lead. On our last day, we stood together on a quiet pier at sunset, watching the sky turn orange over the water. Dylan spoke softly, not as a son trying to justify his choices, but as a man finally ready to acknowledge his father. "Dad," he said, "I thought I was helping you by keeping you safe, but now I see I was only keeping you still, and a man like you was never meant to be still. Thank you." I looked at him and replied, "Life does not end because we slow down. It ends when we stop moving altogether. The only real limit in life is believing you are at the end when you are new beginning." He nodded, tears in his eyes, and for the first time in many years, he hugged me with the same sincerity he had when he was a boy. When we returned home, everything had changed. Not physically, the house was the same, the furniture was the same, but the energy was different. Dylan and Anna no longer spoke to me with instructions, but with respect. They no longer made plans without including me. They began asking where I wanted to go next, what dreams I still wanted to fulfill, and I realized something beautiful. The greatest journey is not the one that takes you across the world. It is the one that leads your family back to your heart. This journey was not just about me traveling to Greece. It was about all of us traveling back to who we were meant to be. A family that walks side by side, not one in front and one behind. I often sit now on the porch in the evenings, watching Lily play in the yard, while Dylan and Hannah prepare dinner inside. And every so often, Dylan steps outside, sits next to me, and we talk, not about responsibilities or expectations, but about life, dreams, and where we might travel next. The house is no longer quiet with unspoken boundaries. It is alive with conversation, shared plans, and a newfound connection. But the greatest victory wasn't that I boarded a plane or sat in first class. It was that I reminded my family, through quiet strength, that age is not the end of life. It is a chapter filled with wisdom, purpose, and opportunity for all those willing to see it. If this story inspired you or reminded you that life doesn't stop with age, it expands. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and comment where you are watching from. I would love to hear your thoughts and your own story.